am a little bit of a cookie fan, and that wasn't even the joke. And I know that there is one cookie to rule them all, and that cookie is God's favorite cookie, and it is the Oreo. And so I just want to put a picture of an Oreo up for a minute so you can just see what you don't have. Yeah, there we go. All right. Now, let's leave that up for a minute. So the Oreo, when God first designed it, was the perfect mix of chocolate cracker and that filling they call stuff. But then some people thought, hey, you know what? Maybe we can improve on God's original design. God made Oreos, right? Yeah, okay, good. And so thus was invented the double stuff. Can we put a picture of the double stuff up? Okay, now if you can't tell, there's more stuff in a double stuff. Now this, I believe, it's hard to improve on God, but things can be done. And this is a miraculous invention. However, there was a group of people that thought, great idea, the double stuff, but we could still do better. And so they invented what we like to call the mega stuff Oreo, okay? Mega stuff, more stuff than double stuff, okay? Now, mega stuff sounds like we've reached the limit, but it turns out we haven't, because those same people said we could put a little more stuff in there, and they invented the most stuff, okay? This isn't even a joke. These are all real things you can go buy, especially if you want diabetes. And so now we have these various versions trying to pack as much stuff in as possible. Go one more picture for me. So just so you can see, the thins isn't even real. But the original, and then the double stuff, and then the mega stuff, and the most stuff. And I think this is great. And I think that this quest of Oreo to put in more and more stuff in our cookies maybe in some ways reflects our personal quest to fit as much stuff into our lives as we can. I don't mean the cream filling, but everything else that we're trying to put into our lives. And I just want to ask you for a minute to look at these options and think about which one of these most reflects your life, right? Is your life, pretty thin? You've got lots of space and margin to do things. Does your life feel ordinary? Does it feel twice as full as it should be? Is your schedule mega stuffed? Is your schedule most stuffed? Like, what does your life look like, right? And I got to tell you, none of these reflect my life, okay? So my life has to be custom made. Can we go one more? This is my life. Okay? And I won't name this student, though they're here today. I will say that the young lady looking on disapprovingly at him over his shoulder is his sister. But I think this is what my life feels like, right? It feels like I am just trying to cram as much in as possible all the time. You guys feel this way a little bit? Yeah, okay, you can make that go away. Thank you. So I think our calendars look like these Oreos. I think our schedules and our lives look like this. And I got to tell you, I keep thinking that at the next stage it'll slow down, right? I keep thinking, it'll get easier. When my kids were born, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, but eventually they'll sleep through the night and it'll get easier. Then they went to school and I thought, okay, well, I'm so tired, but at least they'll be in school now and it'll be easier. I currently have an elementary school age student, a middle school student, and a high school student in the home, and it has just gotten faster every season of my life. And I know this is the case for you, right? I've talked to those of you who are empty nesters who've said, Jim, we thought our kids were going to move out and it was going to get easier. And then our parents started going through health crisis after health crisis, and that became our life. And now we're busier with that than we were with our kids. I've talked to those of you who are at that stage of retirement where you've come to me and say, Jim, I'm actually busier now in retirement as I was when I was working. And I think the reality is we have been told by our culture that this is a value, right? That busyness is the measure of a meaningful life, and that the more stuff we can pack in, the better we're doing at everything in our life. And I think we could even go to the Bible and get some scriptures to wrongly interpret and mean that way. There's a passage today that said we're called to make the most of the time. Right? And isn't that what we feel like we're trying to do? We're trying to make the most of the time. But I think that when Paul says make the most of the time, He's not inviting us to have a life overwhelmed with filler. He's not inviting us to have a life overwhelmed with things that are a lack of substance. Instead, he has a very different intention. Listen to that verse in context. Paul says, "Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time, because the days are evil. So do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." So this is what I want to think about in the month of September. As we begin our sort of school year and our regular calendars kick back in again, and sports and everything is happening, I want to think a little bit what it means to make the most of the time, to live as wise people, not as unwise, to not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And so the next few weeks, that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about some specific areas of our lives guided by this passage in Ephesians. We're going to talk about what it means to make the most of the time with our friends and our spouses. We're going to talk about what it means to make the most of the time with our children and our parents. We're going to talk about what it means to make the most of the time in our work and in our vocations. But today, I just want to talk about some big picture ideas, some framework to help us with all of those things that are going to come. And I just want to give you 3 ideas that I think are really helpful as we reflect on what it means to make the most of the time. The first one is simple. And the first one is that we live with limited time. Like, you know that. You know your time is limited. But most of the time, we don't live like this is true. We don't live like we're living with limited time. I think this is critical for us. In fact, living with limitations actually helps us to make the most of the time. It actually helps us to know what we should and shouldn't be fitting into our lives. There is a movie that I have not yet shown to my kids, but one day I will, called Spaceballs. Spaceballs is like a spoof of all the science fiction movies you can imagine, and there's some stuff that's not appropriate for kids in there. But there's a scene where the main characters are marooned on a desert planet, and they are trying to get to safety, and they've just rescued this princess, and they're carrying her stuff. And I just want to share this clip with you.
Gee, I hope she didn't forget anything. All right, wait a minute, Barb. Put it down. What's in this thing? What's this?
I said take only what you need to survive.
It's my industrial strength hairdryer. And I can't live without it!
Okay, princess. That's it. The fairy tale is over. Welcome to real life. You want this hot air machine? You carry it.
You picked that up.
You pick that up.
Come, darling.
See? It's lighted. Oh, yeah. This is the best. I could have carried 2 or 3 of these. Oh.
Okay. I love the moment where she says, "I can't live without it." I also love that afterwards the guys still pick up the rest of the luggage and carry it, and they're so happy to help. Anyway, when we live without limits, we just pack everything in that we possibly can. We just keep saying, "Yep, we'll add that in, and we'll add that in, and we add that in." When we live without limits, it's like we think that we have unlimited time, and yet, again and again, the scriptures tell us, hey, knowing that your time is finite is really important. In many ways, this is the main message of the book of Ecclesiastes. Know that your time is finite. Like, you are going to die. I don't know when. I don't know if you're going to die today or in a year or in 50 years or in 80 years, but at some point, you're going to die. And the author of Ecclesiastes says, hey, this life, enjoy the life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that are given to you under the sun. This word vain, hebel, really can mean fleeting. Sometimes it's translated like a breath. And the intent of the author is to say, hey, you got lots of great things you can do. Spend time with the people that you love and enjoy great food and do a job that matters. But in the midst of all of that, remember that your life is fleeting. Remember that your time is limited. Remember that no one can anticipate the time of disaster, right? That time and chance happen to us all. This is, I think, what Paul is trying to say when he says, make the most of the days, make the most of the time because the days are evil. He's not just talking about the fact that our world is fallen and broken. He's saying, hey, time is running out. There's only a limited amount of time to do the stuff that matters. And so we have to be the people that say, hey, you know what, when everything is urgent, nothing can be important. We have to say, hey, what are the fleeting things that we're caught up with that aren't worth our limited time? And this is really hard. We'll get into this in detail later, but this is tough. There are times where we say, hey, all of my boys are involved in soccer, my daughter in swimming and figure skating. My kids are really into sports, and I love it. But I also recognize that that's kind of a fleeting thing. From those sports, I hope they're going to learn some character qualities that are really important. I hope they'll learn teamwork and self-sacrifice and hard work and all kinds of things that I want them to take with their lives. But in 20 years, I don't care if my family members know how to play soccer. I don't care. And my boys are very talented, but they ain't getting a soccer scholarship, I don't think. Maybe. Keep trying, guys. And in 20 years, I don't care how fast my daughter can swim a 200. I don't care. But in 20 years, I care if they are compassionate and Christ-like and courageous people. I don't know that it really is going to matter if when they get to their middle years, they still remember all of their trigonometry, but I think it's going to matter if they are greedy and self-centered and angry and small-minded. And so I want to recognize that in my limited time, I gotta push for the things that matter the most. To make the most of the time means to say, hey, I only have a little bit. How do I use this with my kids? I got to tell you, personal crisis for me this summer when I realized that my oldest child was going into 11th grade and I had 2 years left with him in the house. I mean, I freaked out, right? And I realized, oh my gosh, this whole time I thought, well, I'll have forever with them. We'll have that conversation later. We'll have that conversation later. I'll make time for that later. And then I realized this year, I got 2 years. And then he's going to college or he's getting a job, but he is moving out in 2 years. And so I honestly, I'm looking at this year completely differently because I'm living it with limited time. I no longer have as much time as I want to have all those important conversations. I got limited time. So the first piece for us, if we are going to live a life that makes the most of the days, is that we have to recognize what it means to live with limited time. Here's the second thing. We have to look for the will of the Lord. And we hear this actually twice in this passage in Ephesians. Paul says first to find out what is pleasing to the Lord, and then he says, understand what the will of the Lord is. And making the most of the time means asking Christ what it looks like to make the most of the time. And this is huge for us. We have this book that we give away to folks that come to our church for the first time. And by the way, if you're here for the first time, we have copies of this in the narthex for you. Please take one as a thank you for being with us. Not right now, maybe later. It's a really short book called What is God's Will for My Life? That's it. That's all you need to find out what God's will for your life is. Here's why. Because most of the time, when we try to seek God's will, we do it with really small things. And hear me out, because this is going to sound strange, but we worry about who I should marry, or what career I should pursue, or where I should live, or what college or major I should have. And those are all great, but they're just really small. And I say they're small because those are the sort of questions we can ask God once and then go on without Him for the rest of our lives. And I don't believe that finding out the will of the Lord is as simple as getting some answers to some big questions. In fact, I think those may be the least important questions that we ever bring to God. There was an old story. I'm going to change the character. I'm going to say this was a governor of a large state. Let's say it was the governor of Texas. That's a big state. So governor of Texas is going to a high school reunion with his wife. He and his wife met in high school, started dating in high school. Now he's the governor of Texas. He's a big deal, super successful, obviously. And they go to this family reunion, high school reunion. And while they're there, everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, you're the governor. It's so great to see you." And he's hobnobbing with everybody. And he sees in the corner that there's his wife talking to this guy named Brian. Okay? And Brian was the boy his wife dated in high school before she dated him. And all of a sudden, all of his confidence about being the governor kind of melts away a little bit, and he just starts freaking out. Not that his wife's going to leave him, but just, does she think she made the right choice, or does she imagine life would be different? So since he's the governor, he calls his staff aide, and he says, "Hey, do me a favor. I want you to look up this guy, Brian. Tell me everything you can find out about him." And so he hangs up. They go about the party. They drive home, and on the way home, his staff aide calls back, and he shares all this information. And they're in the limo. And the governor turns to his wife and he says, "Honey, I just got to say, I know this sounds weird, but I saw you talking to Brian. And I just had to wonder if you were thinking, boy, if I'd stayed with him, where would I be?" And so let me just tell you that Brian, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but Brian lives in a very small apartment in a not great area of town. He's a store clerk, and he is not married, and he doesn't have any kids. And I just think, as we're pulling up to the mansion in which we live, the governor's mansion, I think it's clear to you that you made the right choice, isn't it, honey?" And she looked at him with a really compassionate look on her face, and she said, "Honey, if I had married Brian, he'd be the governor of Texas." And here's my point. I don't think God cares so much who you marry. He cares a lot how you live out your marriage. I don't think God cares so much what career you pursue. He cares a lot about how you work every day in that career. I don't know if God cares so much about what college you apply to or what major you pick, but He cares a lot about how you apply yourself in those situations. And what God cares about when we're called to look for the will of the Lord, it's to say, hey, not just in one choice, but in every choice, all day long, every day of my life, Jesus, I want to know what you want me to do. And when I have a question, I want to go back to your word and say, hey, what is it that Jesus says about this, and how do I live out that way? And looking for the will of the Lord is one of the critical ways that we say, hey, it's not enough for me to just fill my day. I want to fill my day the way Christ would have me do it. I want to make the most of the time. So we make the most of the time by living with limits and limited time. We make the most of the time by looking for the will of the Lord on a daily basis. And the last place that we make the most of the time is we lean into the end goal. We lean into the end goal. Ecclesiastes is a really weird book. A lot in Ecclesiastes seems kind of depressing, like the end of our passage seemed kind of depressing. Like he says, hey, enjoy your life because it's going to end all of a sudden and you're not going to see it coming and then you'll be dead. But the end of the book of Ecclesiastes has the core message of the book that I think is relevant for us pretty profoundly today. Chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, the author says, here's the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every secret or evil, every secret thing, whether good or evil. What Solomon is saying is that at the end of our life, even though he doesn't yet understand about the resurrection of the dead, at the end of our life, there will be some assessment. There are things that matter and don't matter in this life, and we need to have that end in mind. What's the end goal of your life? I genuinely believe this is a question you should be able to answer. What's the end goal of your life? Mine is to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in death, and somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead. What's yours? What's the end goal of your marriage? I think you should be able to answer this question. I think it's hard to live out a marriage well and not have any idea what you're trying to accomplish. Now, I know you all know that, but I think there's some power in being able to articulate it. What's the end goal for your kids? What do you want your children to grow up to become? When our kids were born, we put a lot of thought into naming them. And part of that for me was like a prayer about who they might grow up to be. My son Jonathan is the best friend of David. David is a man after God's own heart. Almost every night of my life, I've prayed that Jonathan would grow up to be a man after God's own heart. My daughter Zoe is the word that means life in Greek, like the life that comes from God. And almost every day of my life, I've prayed that Zoe would be filled with the life that comes from Jesus to an overflowing into others. My son Asher's name means thankful, happy or blessed or thankful. And almost every day of my life, I've prayed that Asher would know that he was blessed so that he could be a blessing to others. What's the end goal of your work? What do you want to do with your 9 to 5? What are you trying to accomplish at your job? I think if we don't have an answer to these questions, then we might have to ask whether or not we are making the most of our days, whether we are living wisely. Because, and this is so important, when we don't lean into an end goal, we just end up all over the place. When I was younger, I had the privilege of going very often with my family to the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and we'd spend beach weekends there or weeks there as a vacation time as a family. And there was the big concern was really undertow, right? We worried that, hey, my parents worried I'd swim out and there'd be an undertow and I'd get sucked down and I'd get sucked out to sea and they'd never see me again. And so we talked about this a lot. And I had some experiences, never where I was in danger, but where I would swim for a while and then I'd look up and I'd realize I can't see my parents anymore, because the current had taken me so far down the beach, and I would literally swim to shore and then walk up the beach looking for my parents, which is kind of a scary experience. And so my parents said, hey, let's not do that again. Here's what we want you to do. When you go to the beach, we want you to notice 2 markers, right? We don't care what they are. It might be the lifeguard stand, might be that big umbrella down the beach, but pick 2 places, and every time you come up from playing or doing something in the water, just turn and check your markers, right? See if you are still in between them or if you've started to move down the beach. This came to my mind because a few weeks ago at the Global Leadership Summit, there was a speaker named Christine Kane. She talked about her parents doing the exact same thing for her. And then she said, here's what's so critical. She said, her dad told her, the markers matter because all you have to do to start drifting is nothing. Like, drifting is what just naturally happens. So if you're not looking at those end goals, if you're not leaning into God's purpose for your life, if you're not thinking about where you are, you just start to drift. All you have to do to drift is nothing. Nothing illegal, nothing immoral, nothing unethical. Because drifting is the default position for humanity. Christine says, all you have to do to drift in your physical fitness is nothing. All you have to do to drift with your hairline, nothing. All you have to do to drift in your marriage, you don't have to cheat on your spouse. You don't have to do something horrible. You don't have to have a big fight. You just do nothing. All you have to do to drift, for your work culture to drift, for your children to drift, for our culture to drift economically and socially and morally and spiritually, we just stop checking the markers. We stop having a goal in mind. And if we live like we have all the time in the world, and if we embrace empty words rather than looking for the Lord's will daily, and if we take our eyes off the end goal, our mega stuffed lives may end up being full of fluff and empty of substance. So, 3 things really important for us. We have to live with limited time. We have to look for the will of the Lord. We have to lean into those end goals. And then let me just give you a bonus one. And the bonus one is really simple. I'm going to give you the most, or one of the most important spiritual tools to combat the problem of our mega stuffed lives. Okay, I'm going to teach you a word today. It's a word that I don't know if you've ever used before. So say it after me. The word is no. Everybody say no. No. Good job. It's a Greek word, okay, and it means no. And I believe that in the midst of our mega stuffed lives, in the midst of a culture that tells us just keep fitting in things into your overly crammed schedule, maybe the most important spiritual tool we have is no. Not that I don't care about all these things, but that at some point I have to say no to some of the things the world is asking me to fit in so I can say yes to what Christ is calling me to do and to be. We just had a meeting for our confirmation class. We're starting a new class this year. I'm really excited about it. I always am. One of the things we always tell our students is perhaps the greatest value of this process is that you will be asked to pick Jesus over other things. You'll be asked to pick Jesus over soccer matches and over scouting events and over orchestra concerts and maybe over schoolwork. And we think that's great because your whole life will be a question of what you will choose to fit in and what you won't. And sometimes we must say no to good things so we can say yes to the one ultimate thing that matters. So brothers and sisters, my prayer for you today is that you would live with limited time. You would look for the will of the Lord. You would lean into the end goal, and that you would make the most of the time. For as Paul says, be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. Thanks be to him. Amen.